a band. You hear it?
It is necessary for the recording of sound to convert the sound waves to corresponding changes in light. The sound waves produced by my voice are transmitted through the air to the microphone, where these sound waves are converted to changes in an electric current. These variations in the electric current are then amplified and used to control the light. This varying beam of light falling on the photoelectric cell produces variations in the electric current, which are directly proportional to the variations in the light beam. The sound track. As the varying electrical current in the photoelectric cell is small, a vacuum tube amplifier is required to increase it to the point where it will operate a loudspeaker. Soundtrack.
This week, as you can see in the title, we are continuing off the major Arcana series that I have been lucky enough to have been blessed with. I have 7 Degrees of Wisdom and Mario from Symbolic Studies to do this series with. It has been an awesome time so far. It's been very informative for me in general, so I can't be happy enough to keep doing this. I'm learning at least, so... And real quick, before we get it going, I'm sure everybody knows who they both are by now, but if you don't, Megan, would you like to let people know who you are and what your deal is and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a practicing occultist. I'm also a professional tarot reader. I teach a bunch of classes on the occult, various different subjects. I read at 2 local shops in Fort Smith, Arkansas, but I also do online appointments too. So, and if you guys are interested in getting a tarot reading with me or a consultation, you can just get a hold of me on Instagram, 7 Degrees of Wisdom, no underscores, no dashes, no numbers on the end. And then you can reach me on Facebook at Megan Allen, 7 Degrees of Wisdom in parentheses. I have a big Kabbalistic tree of life on my page now. So if you guys want to get a hold of me for any of my services, just direct message me and we'll get you set up.
Very nice. And all the links for your stuff is in the show now, and it will be when it drops regularly. And Mario, let everybody know what is up with you and your stuff, please.
Yeah, sure thing. So my project is called Symbolic Studies. I'm on Instagram, symbolic.studies, and YouTube at Symbolic Studies. But people can find all of my stuff at symbolicstudies.com. And so generally, I like to put out content based around the sign that we're currently in under the tropical system. But I like to venture out and talk about other things symbolically as well. And I also am available for tarot readings. I have astrological prints. I've got study packets, things like that. But symbolicstudies.com is the hub.
Definitely. Go check them both out. And the links to all his stuff is in the bottom as well. I guess we'll kick it off now just to get into it. We're going to continue with the Wheel of Fortune card. I think that's where we left off last, and we will be starting off again going forward like we have been doing. We'll be doing the Toth deck, and then we'll go into the Rider. And here we go. This is the Wheel of Fortune for the Toth deck. So I guess, Mario, if you want to take it away.
Cool, yeah. So the Wheel of Fortune, it is the 10th card of the Major Arcana. And it being the 10th card, that's a really important spot. We basically use a base 10 numbering system. 10 has often been looked at as kind of like a perfect number, a number of God, if you will, because you do have that 1 and 0 to make a 10. Obviously here it's an X, Roman numeral 10. But the 1 and 0 combined, it just reminds me of the masculine and the feminine coming together. And I've been saying for a while now, a lot of things break down symbolically to poles and holes. And so the number 10 is very much in line with that as well. You got that 1, you got that phallus, and then you got that 0, which is more feminine, more like a yoni. And so when you're dealing with the circle, or you're dealing with the wheel, or you're dealing with the sphere, you're dealing with, to me, heavenly symbolism. And so there's a long tradition associating the square or the cross with earth. It's associated with stability and foundations and structures. But the heavens, what's above our heads, is usually compared to a circle or a sphere. And it makes sense when you look at the mathematics of a circle, there's infinite points, and so I think of just kind of the infinite aspect of the cosmos, of space, and my personal opinion is when you look into outer space, you are essentially looking into the spirit realm. That's one of my things, so when you're talking about the wheel of fortune, you're talking about the great wheel of life. You're talking about the great wheel in the heavens, and there's a point in the night sky where this wheel revolves around, and it is in the northern sky. It's around Polaris, the pole star, which is sometimes called the nail star or the sky nail because it is the hub of the wheel. It's the point of pivot. So if you take a time-lapse photo of the night sky, and if you're looking towards the northern sky, you're going to see one central star, and you're going to see a streak of stars revolving around it. And so to me, this wheel is symbolic of the wheel of heaven, but it also is related to all wheels, including like the wheel of the Chariot, as an example, right? The 7th card of the major arcana. And so we're talking about cycles, we're talking about movement. This card is related to Jupiter. And so Jupiter has this expansive sort of quality that it's well known for, this kind of fiery electric quality, right? You could even see the lightning bolts here in the card, right? But this wheel and how it relates to Jupiter, it almost, to me, what it feels like is it's almost kind of like this energetic pulse to get through the second phase of the major arcana, so we go from the Fool card to the Wheel of Fortune, which is right in the middle, essentially, and then you have the second half of the major arcana. So it's almost kind of like this jolt of energy to get through this next cycle, which is way more, I would say, abstract. It's way more etheric, and so there's a lot of things related to the second half of the major arcana that I think are a little harder for a lot of newer people to the tarot to kind of wrap their head around. I think that the first 10 cards in a lot of ways are a little more simplistic and a little more straightforward. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, there's amazing, deep, complicated sort of things going on there. But the second half, I think, is a little more interpretive, a little more artistic, and as I've already said, kind of a little bit more abstract. What you'll generally see in a lot of major arcana fortune cards is that you're going to see 3 figures around the wheel. Generally, one is going upward, another one is resting up top, and then another one is falling down below. And to me, this very much reminds me of just something very easy to kind of compare it to. It kind of reminds me of, fixed, mutable, and cardinal signs. So I almost kind of look at like the cardinal nature of things going upward, and then I think the animal up top is kind of symbolic of this fixed nature, and then the animal coming down is more mutable, which is liable to change. And so you'll see that the figure usually going down is associated with like an underworld sort of deity. So sometimes it's the devil. Here you can see it looks like, an alligator with serpentine legs. And so very much just reminds me of, this descent sort of nature, this underworld sort of quality. Whereas the ape here going upward reminds me very much of like Thoth. So Hanuman in the Vedic tradition, is very much compared to Thoth, Mercury. And so I think that kind of makes sense. And then the Sphinx up top, I mean, there's so much to be said about the Sphinx and the Sphinx sort of mysteries in general. But one of the things that I kind of like to think about with the Sphinx is what I've heard is that it really is an amalgamation of Virgo and Leo, and that in ancient Egypt, the beginning of the year was Virgo season and the end of the year was actually Leo season. And so just in the Sphinx itself, I think what you're kind of getting is a cyclical sort of symbol. The beginning of the year going all the way around to the end of the year, and then it being Leo. So it's actually a synthesis of the beginning and the end of their year. The alternative hermetic title for this card is Lord of the Forces of Life, which I think is really interesting. Again, this wheel of life, this cyclical sort of nature with everything. And so what goes around comes around, right? So it's like you can't have life without death. You can't have beginnings without endings, et cetera, et cetera. And so I will also say as well that the way I tend to interpret wheel symbolism these days is that I think in a lot of ways, a lot of people, when it comes to the wheel, they tend to be focused on the external aspect of the wheel. But the internal aspect of the wheel, that hub, that axle is very, very important, because without that axle, the wheel ceases to be. It can't do its job, right? And so the axle of the wheel is the axle of the cosmos, which is the world axis, which has a relationship with the North Pole and the North Star, as I kind of been saying. But we are also part of this symbolism of the wheel of life as well. So our spines are kind of like axles, and our chakras have been compared to wheels or discs, if you will. And so there's lots of wheel symbolism that I think we directly relate to as well, so we're kind of like, we're the hub of a wheel, and so I think there's something to be said about all of that.
Yeah.
But
for sure.
Yeah, off the top of my head, that's what I've got.
Real quick, I just want to add on to some of the things that you said, man.
Please.
That I think I'm really happy you mentioned. Before the show, I was even mentioning to you how, again, I think that you'll see, I'm just taking Toth as an example of a god for that sphere. 8, you can see him progress up the tree, I think, in different ways. And again, sphere 8 on the tree, directly across from it, you would go through Tiferet, and then you would hit Chesed, which is where this falls on. Again, 8 is basically directly across from 4 on the tree on an angle. So again, you're seeing Toth, but maybe in a different timeline or in a different stage of his progression up the tree is now, the monkey. You know what I'm saying? Or you see the wheels from the chariot, but then you see it here. There's something up, I think, with these symbols progressing or changing, a character arc that you're seeing in art, I think, in the Taro.
There you go. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, it's speaking to the nature of all storylines, which, just as you said, there's some sort of arc, and it's speaking to the nature of the Taro as well, in that we start with the Fool, we go on this arc, we go on this journey, the Fool's journey, and then you end up at the universe, and then you come back right to the Fool again, So the major arcana is very cyclical. It's not unlike a wheel, itself. So yeah, absolutely. All of your points are definitely well taken.
Yeah, thank you. Is there anything you wanted to say on this, Megan?
So I really like the color play here. And I like how there's, the stars from heaven and then the lightning bolts coming back down. We all know that's, your front, start at Kether and then come back down, and then you have to make your way back up the ascension. I really like that they have the lightning bolt symbolism in there too. And then they carried over, the monkey's not in the rider weight, but the Sphinx. And there is a Sphinx, a serpent, and then a Hermanubis and the rider weight. I like how they kind of changed it up a little bit, but they kept the Sphinx because that's the most important part of this card for what it represents. But for me, like I told you guys before, I'm not very familiar with this deck. But I do see, how he came up with the design for these. And once I explain the rider weight, it'll become a little bit more apparent once I get to that point too. But like I said, I love this geometric thing that he's got going on. And I have a theory about that, about, sacred geometry being used in conjunction with magical practice. And I see this apparent in a lot of the different cards, which I think is pretty cool. But that's all I've got about this one in particular. I've got quite a bit of information about the writer.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, one thing I did notice now, too, real quick, I just want to bring up. I think you mentioned it before. Maybe you didn't. I don't remember. But, it is also the letter Kaf, or however you say that, on there. And that is, the meaning of that can be, or a symbol could be like a open hand, which is now opposite of the Hermit, which was a closed hand. But if you see this card, it does have a closed hand on it, which I do find interesting on the wheel. You know, even though a symbol for that Hebrew letter could be an open hand. So, like, could you even be showing, like, could that be showing possibly going up the tree more instead of going down the tree? Like, you know, you having the closed hand on something that should be open, is that showing the magic in the change?
Right.
You know, are you showing you closing the open hand in this card, actually? You know what I'm saying? So who knows? And a thing I also found interesting that I did want to just throw in there, and I hate to keep going back to the eyeball stuff, but even the way that the muscles around your eye are on your eye kind of almost look like that same thing where it goes around your eye, but it actually isn't like flat. They spiral around your eye, the muscles. So you're even seeing that little spiral come out here with the apes, the monkey's tail. You know, you got all these things. This, to me, you know, it could look like that. And I was going to leave it for the next card, but I also do even wonder, like, is this card showing you like a lower arc of the orphanum? You know, before it starts like changing into all those spinning discs and eyeballs and the freaky angel look. You know, is this like kind of like a lower arc of that? Because I would kind of put the orphanum like above the fourth sphere, which is where this falls.
Yes, it is. You're totally right. Yeah. That's a really good connection. Because in other versions of the card, you're also going to see the cherubim angels, you know, in the corners, right? And so that's kind of a traditional sort of thing, which to me relates back to a few things related to the number 4 here, actually. First off, the Jupiter glyph looks like number 4, right? And so there is that connection. And also Jupiter has a lot to do with the Emperor card as well, which is the 4th card of the Major Arcana. But the cross or the X also has a relationship to the number 4 as well. And so obviously with the X, very easy to kind of look at it and see that there's 4 different quadrants or there's 4 corners or whatever you want to say. And so there's this interesting sort of contrast between, again, the circular nature of the wheel itself, the cyclical aspect of that, and then also the 4, which tends to be related to the wheel as well, actually. So the 4 and the circle, or the cross and the circle, or the square and the circle, in so many different ways have been combined esoterically and within artwork and stuff, because it really is, it's kind of like this micro macro sort of thing, or masculine feminine sort of thing in so many different ways. But what I was going to say, though, is that actually Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, which I think is really interesting. And then the Cancer glyph is the 6-9, which begs just to be rotated. You know, it just looks kind of like a wheel, in my opinion, right? And then Cancer relates to the Chariot card, right? So again, more wheel symbolism, basically. And so anyway, so those are just a few thoughts that I wanted to put out there.
Awesome, yeah. Now we'll, real quick, just to add, I meant to say this before when I was talking about seeing possibly, like, you know, Tahuti going up the tree. You know, you did mention Leo, and like I was saying before, if I was at Sphere 8 and I wanted to go to Sphere 4, where this kind of like falls around, I would go pass through Leo. You know, and you did mention Leo. So, like, again, like I said, I would go from 8 to 6 to 4. Maybe, you know, part of that Sphere 6 where Leo falls on the Tree of Life has moved up to the other part of the tree now, to here. You know, like, that's another character arc. You know what I'm getting at? So. Right.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of interesting, too, because the way I've also looked at this layout here with the 3 figures around the wheel, and my understanding, too, is that there's a Greek concept of the 3 fates, which relates to the Wheel of Fortune, and that this is kind of the Wheel of Fates or Wheel of Destiny as well. But even if you look at the Leo glyph, if you just envision it in your mind, there's 2 lower parts and then a higher part, you know, in the middle. There's that hump, you know, in the middle of the Leo glyph. So there's like the curves on the sides, the hump, and then the other curve on the other side. And so it kind of just reminds me of this nature, too, of like, there's 2 lower energies. One is going upward, one is going downward. And then there's this sort of privileged or advantageous position up top that's more stable, you know. And so just thought I would throw that out there, too. I'm now kind of seeing some more Leo symbolism just kind of in here.
I mean, if now, I'm looking at it now and I'm like, well, this really doesn't look too far off from the sun sigil, which would fit on the sixth sphere that you got to pass through to get to the fourth one over by Jupiter or Chesed. So it's like you almost even see like the sigil of the sun being incorporated here. And is that because maybe you've passed through that sphere on the tree and the way the story's going?
Right. So the last thing I'll say before we move on to the Rider-Waite version is that wheel symbolism is so deep. It's so important. It's kind of like this endless sort of rabbit hole. But one of the things is that a lot of our luminaries in the sky, a lot of our planets in the sky, they've been compared to chariots. And so I have tarot decks, where it's like the moon is a chariot, the sun is a chariot. All of these planets are chariots. And so the chariot wouldn't be anything without the wheel, essentially, And so that's just something to kind of take into account too. Just chariot symbolism, I think in general, I think is very much related to this card.
Mm-hmm. Very well said.
I'd have to agree there.
Yeah.
There we go. Now we can get on to yours, Megan. Sorry.
Maro, do you want to talk about this first, or do you want me to go ahead?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. I got quite a bit of notes on this one because it's super occulty.
Awesome.
Okay. So you mentioned the secret name before, which is the Lord of the Forces of Life. Okay, so Wheel of Fortune is like twist of fate that sets you on the path to fulfill your destiny. It's a turning point in the ascension of consciousness. It represents a portal or a gateway where your resolve will be tested by a spin of fate. It's a call to a higher purpose, a new direction, takes you out of your comfort zone so that you can grow and evolve. So this is key 10. So when I say keys, this is what they're called in occult circles, I guess. They're called keys. So this is key 10. So this is the first card with a double-digit number. So it has a combined meaning of 1 and 0. So 1 and 0 together is the beginning of the Ein, okay, on the tree. 1 walks through the gate of 0 and starts a new cycle, and it also represents the 10th Sephiro on the tree of life. It represents the returning to unity or source. And then the 4 corners. So we have the Lamassu. They're also known as the guardians of the 4 watchtowers, the four royal stars, fixed signs of the Zodiac, the 4 angelic beings that are mentioned in Ezekiel and Revelations as well. Then the wheel itself. So it's a whole cycle of cosmic expression divided into 3 concentric circles. So I'm talking about the circles here in the middle. So they represent the different planes of creation in Kabbalah, or the 4 worlds as they're known. So the center is the source of divine spark. So I'm talking about the dot that's directly in the middle of the wheel. Then you have the inner 2 circles. So the 8 spokes represent universal radiant energy that flows from spirit out. Okay. Then the symbols are the 3 essentials of alchemy. So you have the symbols of Mercury, salt, and sulfur, which also represents spirit, body, soul. And then the 4th one on the bottom is the alchemical symbol for disillusion. And it means to dissolve something into an aqueous solution.
Oh, aqueous.
Okay.
We have the aqueous humor in our...
Yep. And then the 3rd one, the outer one, represents the material world of manifestation. Okay. And then you have the 4 Hebrew letters as well as the 4 English letters. So now I'm going to get into that a little bit. So the 4 Hebrew letters is Yad He Vav He. That's what that means. Then you have the Sphinx represents the whole alchemical process of ascension and enlightenment. That's what the Sphinx represents. So if you look there, you have Taro. Well, there's a lot of anagrams that are associated with that. So you have Rhoda, Taro, Orat, Torah, and Ator. And what that translates into is Wheel of Taro speaks law, Hathor, or nature. Okay, and then the Mother Nature, also you can take that back to the Empress card. And Hathor is the Egyptian goddess. So they're kind of interrelated, Hathor and the Empress card. And then you have the red demon-like figure that's on there. It's actually called a Hermanubis, which is a combo of Hermes and Anubis. So what that represents is the evolution of consciousness from the lower realm to the higher realm. And that's why he's on his way up the wheel to get to the Sphinx position. It represents your true self beyond the veil of personality. Let's see. So it's like an evolutionary journey or cycle of manifestation. So the sword that the Sphinx is holding represents sharpened awareness, the power of liberation, and it frees you from the cycle of reincarnation over and over and over again. Now, the yellow serpent there on the left-hand side, that represents the vibration from the cosmos down into the physical realm. It is the radiant energy that descends from the heavens down into matter. And then the yellow in the card represents solar force. The clouds represent Jupiter. And the wheel represents the Lord of Rain, purification through alchemy of the true self. So this is an alchemical card. It's the universal principle of abundance and prosperity. It's about taking risk and creating rhythms in your life, because we all go through the different rhythms of our life, of lower realm, higher realm, rebirth, transformation on different levels at different points on your path. Okay, so it also represents air and fire, and then the planet Jupiter, which is a fortune and expansion. Like Mario said, Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, which represents the Chariot card. And then, so some key words for this card is accomplishment, mastery, success, balanced expression. It's an ordered plan behind the chaos. It represents change, learning through cycles and unexpected change. And so it also represents the kingdom to heaven is within. So this is just a card of a twist of fate, things happening for you that kind of throws you off kilter and sets you on the path that you need to ascend. So basically that's what all this card represents from an occult perspective. I was going over this again last night, and the books that they're holding, I was wondering if you had a take on that.
I would assume that it's one of the books of the Bible. I don't know if there's official sort of claims out there from the artist or anything else like that, but that's what I would think, especially given their angelic, presence and everything with the wings and all of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, or is it kind of like the Akashic record or something, perhaps, as well?
Yeah, it very well could be. I actually love that very much. That you said that. That's definitely possibility.
And I just have to say too, just real quick, speaking of records, the record is circular, right? And it needs that central point of pivot in order for it to spin and stuff. And I've heard too that some people have likened or have compared the Akashic record to being more circular in nature than anything else, and then of course many people have said that we live in a universe, and that this is kind of like almost like an album that's being played, or this we're all songs within this great sort of compilation, or whatever you want to say. So this spin, it kind of relates to record keeping in certain ways as well. I would say even our hard drives, they're kind of different now, but they used to spin, and then tapes, they need to spin, and, things like that. And so, I don't know, it's just it's making me think about some of that stuff right now.
Yep, that's very cool.
Yeah, I was looking at this and kind of thinking about a little bit about what I was actually talking to you guys about, those pictures I was showing you earlier. Again, the Hermit was before this card, and he had his staff. And I was talking about how I thought that the Zonyals of Zin kind of looked like the Hermit holding his staff. I do think if the staff does go back to the Zonyals of Zin, if that's the thing that you're going to raise your lens and change your pupil and all that. as silly as this sounds, and this is something that even like my co-host and the lady that is on the show, even going into the more scientific part of how the eyes work, as silly as this sounds, and I can maybe pull it up on here real quick just to show. I mean, I don't think it's like a stretch, and again, it all depends on how it's depicted and the way they took like the artwork, but like, not for nothing, this kind of does look like bookbinding right here.
Interesting.
I mean, you don't have to get crazy, but that just looks like bookbinding to me, like with glue.
Not a stretch.
You know? Yeah. So I saw that, and then I see these things, like I was telling you before, how like some ways I've seen this thing to the left even depicted a little bit like lavender. And I said, again, lavender goes back to Hoth. You know, you see, again, we saw the monkey on the other card that we were saying maybe that was, Toth on a higher arc. You know, so, the Hermit card, these sticks, this stuff that looks like the bookbinding to me. And then the fact of your eyeball gets pulled open from 4 directions, but yet it screws closed. I could see the X being the 4 directions, but then it changes as you screw your pupil closed. And there's like 3 different sizes that your pupil will normally be. And I'm wondering if that, like this Wheel of Fortune card is even showing you, let me go back to it, showing you like, the other stages of your pupil size actually.
Could be.
Well,
from when you're screwing it closed. Rings.
I'm glad you brought that up, Megan. Just the outer and inner nature of the wheel itself, right? Because concentric rings, that's a whole rabbit hole as well, because it's like Atlantis, Plato's Atlantis, it was concentric ringed, right? You're talking about a target or bullseye, concentric rings. You're talking about ripples in water, concentric rings. You're talking about, growth rings in a tree, concentric rings. And so it's like, that's how a lot of nature works. It starts from the sacred center, it starts from the source, and then it expands outward. And there's something to be said about returning back to itself as well. So this reminds me of a torus field in so many ways. So I think that there's absolutely a relationship between the torus field and the wheel itself. They're kind of one and the same, but the concentric ring nature, the inner and the outer, the shelled nature of reality, the spheres of reality, I think is kind of encoded in what's being said here. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because there's so many different things you can kind of relate it to. And speaking about that, I'm really glad you brought up the whole thing about 10 returning back to source sort of thing, which that's what the Hermit card represents. It's the last phase before you return back to self. Yep. The 9th card and then the 10th card. And then kind of getting to your bookbinding thing a little bit, dude. So in a lot of decks, the next card is Justice, the 11th card. Depending on the deck, it's either 8 or 11. And Justice corresponds with Libra. You're going to see that sword once again. Sword is, an anagram for words. And so there's that whole dynamic. And then even Libra itself, it's the first 5 letters of library. And so there's lots of librarian book sort of documentation stuff going on with Libra. And actually for very, very good reason, because Libra season is right after a lot of harvest seasons. And so like the grain harvest, as an example, takes place during Virgo, which is why Virgo is associated with grains and wheat and things like that. And then right after that is Libra. And so you need to know how much grain you have in order to go to market and in order to make money and all this other stuff. So there's lots of bookkeeping stuff that's actually related to Libra as well. So bookkeeping, knowledge, the written word, things like that. It's kind of just in play here with these couple of cards, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, even with, I guess we're going to get to it because I think the Justice card, even with the Justice card, depending on which card it is, I hate to keep going back to it. It's just I keep seeing this stuff everywhere in Taro. Even the way light reflects in your eyes is almost, I've seen that almost like perfectly put on these Justice cards on these cups.
Right,
and if you look at your lens, it almost kind of looks like a contact or a jellyfish, where the way it moves is going up and down. So like those cups literally could just be the lens in a fixated point, and the light reflecting off of it. But all right, I'll get into the next one if you guys.
Last thing I'll just say about the X, because the X is a really important symbol. There's a lot of occult symbolism related to the X. And just want to say with the X, it reminds me of this idea of the crossroads. And where we live is a crossroad sort of place. You know, we live in between these different realities or domains or universes or whatever you want to say. There's lots of different metaphors for it. And so Mercury relates to the crossroads. Right. And so Mercury relates to the crossroads. Sometimes he's known as being the Lord of the Crossroads. Hecate is known as being the Lady of the Crossroads. When you're thinking crossroads, I think of travel and I think of journeying. And that is one of the more important aspects of the chariot wheel, or the wheel itself, is this journey, the journey of the soul. And so the biggest journey you can go on is, to me, the journey of the afterlife. The journey to the underworld, or the journey to heaven, right? And here we have this heavenly background, right, in the artwork. And so that is the ultimate journey. That is the ultimate trip. And that relates to Mercury as well, because he's a psychopomp. He's a guide of souls. You know, he's a messenger of the gods. He's able to go between the different realms and everything else. And even some tarot decks, they have put the glyph of Mercury on the actual chariot in the Chariot card, which I think is a brilliant move, because I think it makes a lot of sense. You know,
transportation.
So, the what was that?
I said it's already transportation, so I mean it should be.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Exactly. So this wheel, in and of itself, it gets you from A to B, but it's also kind of like a portal. It's kind of like a doorway in and of itself. You know, and that is what the world axis is. You know, it's a bridge between domains, you know. So that's how I personally look at it. But the X actually corresponds with all of this stuff, because the X is that crossroad. The point in which the lines cross each other, that is the point of ascension, whether you're talking about the cross or you're talking about the X. And so with X, you have sex, right? And so you have sex magic, and you have all the things that are kind of implied with that. And then you also get hex as well, so more magical sort of stuff. And then also X relating kind of like to the hiss as well. And so there's lots of magical stuff with the X that you can obviously talk about like all day long sort of thing. But it's a very magical letter. Phonetically, there's a lot to be said about it as well. And so there's lots of important words that use that X, but I think it relates to some of the stuff that I just brought up. Just wanted to throw that out there as well.
That was well said. I would even add to like the whole snake thing you said with the sound, even the way that you see the snake like kind of, you know, rolling out or whatever. That even looks like, if you were to look at it, to me, because of like messing with audio and making podcasts, I could see that being a waveform, and like the smaller point would be a higher pitch. And as it gets bigger, that's more of the lower. So like I could even see like the tail almost looks like a sound wave opening up, going
absolutely.
from higher to lower waves.
That's it. Yeah, exactly.
Was there anything else you wanted to say, Megan, before we go on to the next one?
No, I was just you were talking about the vibration. So in magical practice, breathwork, visualization, vibration. Yeah. Those are the three things that you need to be able to do to perform magic correctly.
Very well said.
So I really liked that symbolism there with that, it coming down from the heaven and then making its way back up, lower realm, back up to the higher realm. So that makes total sense to me.
Yeah. That even could be why he's red, because of the chaos and change of going back up now. You know, who knows?
Yeah.
How about the fact that, I mean, I can't see this card and not giggle a little bit that the wheel is in his ass crack.
Yo, I never know. How did I never notice that?
Totally is. Didn't notice that. That's awesome.
Oh, really? I've noticed it ever since I saw it the first time. Every single time I see it, I'm like, it makes me giggle.
Oh,
it's funny.
It must be gay sex magic.
It's a hilarious little detail.
Yeah, that is great. That I've never. Wow. All right. Of all people, I should have noticed. Here we go. So here is it's considered adjustment on the Toth deck.
That's right. Yes. So here we have adjustment, which actually Crowley talked about why he called it adjustment over balance or justice. And his reasoning behind it, this is in his book of Thoth, is something along the lines of everything seeks a balance, everything seeks equilibrium, and in order for that equilibrium or that balance to occur, things need to be adjusted. Yes. And that the only thing that really happens here are these little adjustments, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And visually, you're seeing here a scale, right? The scales of justice, right? But if I'm not mistaken, he also wrote about somewhere this balance, actually, almost imagining like a spinning top, or imagining like a plate on one of those sticks or whatever, or imagining something that's just rotating around, a ballerina, if you will, which actually relates to this very, very nicely. But imagine a ballerina, you know, or imagine something that's spinning, the whirling dervishes or something like that. You know, these the idea of needing to adjust in order for the spin to kind of keep going. And here we were just talking about spin, you know, with the Wheel of Fortune and these cycles and everything else. And so one of the things I think about with this spin, actually, it kind of seems like a stretch, but actually it's really, there's a potent weave here and there's a potent thread to be pulled out here. But notice the feet of Lady Justice here, and notice how they come to a point. Right. Mm-hmm. This is a very deliberate detail. And this harkens back maybe to one of the more popular sort of comparisons here. These old Venus statues. You guys probably know what they look like, but it's like a very bulby woman, heavy up top. But you notice that her feet always taper down, exactly how they taper down here. And the idea of feet tapering down, it alludes to balance, this idea of keeping balance, that you can tip either which way. But it also falls in line with a lot of esoteric information related to the idea of balance being related to the world axis, actually. And that everything revolves around this central point, not unlike a wheel, not unlike a spinning top, and all these other things that I've been talking about. And so tapered feet, one-legged postures, you will also see with Mercury as well. And it's not uncommon for Mercury Hermes to be on one leg, and the other leg is like right about to take off, or it's just hovering right above the ground. You see this actually in the Magician card as well. You see that the Magician card in the Crowley deck here, he is balancing on one foot, essentially. So there's a whole line of symbolism, there's a whole lineage of symbols or of works of art that actually deliberately show what's going on right here. And what it always comes back to, in my opinion, seemingly, is the world axis, because the world axis is what was thought of to have brought order and stability and structure, because it gives the whole system something to revolve around, essentially. And so it might look like a small little detail, but there's a whole bunch of stuff you can kind of pull away from her tapered feet down there, essentially. And so what you see here is actually that same dynamic mirrored in other places in the card as well, with those spikes kind of balancing on those balls there. You see the two down below, and then you see that it's kind of mirrored and flipped, you know, on the upper portion of the card. There's this whole line of thinking that Lady Justice is blind. And I may have said this in one of the other streams that we did, but one of the things I've read from a awesome symbologist, her name is Barbara Walker. I feel like I shout her out all the time, but she's really fantastic. She has a couple of books on symbolism that are honestly top tier, in my opinion. But one of the things she has said in one of her books is that women have always been designated as the figures of justice. And she says that one of the reasons why is because women get to choose their partner. Women get to choose who they want to couple with and who they want to procreate with and everything else. And it's not the man's role. The man is allowed to couple with a woman. You know, it's the woman being the guardian of her own gateway. She gets to choose, you know, and that there's a lot of cultures that understood this very, very acutely. And they had different ceremonies and rituals where women could judge the men of the village and they could choose who they want to be with based on whatever, tickles their fancy, I guess. But who was, maybe physically gifted or intelligent or whatever. And so there's a long tradition where it's kind of understood that generally under traditional sort of gender circumstances and stuff, that the woman actually gets to choose her partner. And so this kind of fits with the idea that she's Lady Justice. She gets to basically hand out justice, and she does it, in a very calculated sort of way, but also she needs to use her own discernment. But there's a word I'm looking for right now. She does it swiftly, but she also is impartial. She's not biased, essentially. And that's the whole entire idea. So she's completely upright. She's not leaning either which way. She's right there in the middle with her sword, which the sword also is a symbol that relates to delivering justice. The sword, in order to use it, there's no sort of room for error with the sword. You have to know what you're doing. So once it cuts, it cuts. Once it severs, once it breaks, you can't put that thing back together again anymore. And so the sword in and of itself is kind of known as being a very impartial sort of tool, right? And so so to me, it just lines up nicely with all of this symbolism, essentially. And then also the Hebrew letter is Lamed, which relates to what's called an ox goad, I believe. And what that is essentially, it's kind of like a staff with an iron sort of kind of nail at the end. And you use this to basically, get your farm animals in order, your ox or your sheep or whatever. And so it's a tool of the shepherd, essentially, which is really, really interesting, actually, because the ox goad, it's meant to lead your flock, wherever it is you're going. It's just a stick or a tool. And so you can use it, in a sort of violent kind of way. You can use it in an aggressive sort of way, or you can use it in a sort of gentle sort of way. In this way, it relates to the crook and the flail that you see like Egyptian pharaohs and stuff sometimes holding across their chest. The crook being something that is more gentle, and then the flail is something that's used that's, maybe perhaps a little bit more aggressive or whatever, more physical, to get your animals in line. But the ox goad is part of the same tradition. And so it's this just long staff, this long tool. And in a way, it relates to also the glyph of Libra, because it's been said that the glyph of Libra is actually an ox yoke, which is what they put around oxen so that they can hook them up to the plows. And so the glyph for Libra, some people have said that it's actually an ox yoke. It's the thing that you put around the neck of an ox, which is really, really interesting too, because opposite Libra is Aries. And there's a relationship with Aries and the ox yoke that I'm totally spacing on right now, but there's a relationship there basically. And so anyway, those are a few random things off the top of my head regarding adjustment, Libra, balance, all that kind of stuff. But I would love to hear what you guys have to say about everything.
You can go for it, Megan.
So the one thing, I kept counting the spheres to see if I could find 10 or 11. And, the main ones, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there is 10. Of course, there's more. But to me, it looks like she's guarding something. To me, that looks like a curtain. I also see a lot of triangular shapes. These are also used in magical invocations. When you're doing your pentagram and hexagram rituals, when you're drawing the different versions of the triangles. So I like that he used a lot of these triangles. And it also looks like there's some sort of curtain behind her, like she's guarding the information beneath. She's kind of like the gateway to the hidden realms that are behind her. And that's what I'm getting out of this one. I mean, you can get the 10 Sephiroth there that look like, they're behind her, kind of like she's almost guarding the tree, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, she is. She's absolutely a guardian here for sure, 1000%. What I was going to say real quick, just because it came to me now. So I was trying to make the link between this ox yoke and Aries, and actually, what I was trying to say, or what I was trying to think of, is the relationship between the ox yoke and Taurus, because Taurus is a bull. Sometimes it's referred to directly as an ox. Aleph, the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet, corresponds with the fool, which means ox. But I think it's really, really interesting that Libra is ruled by Venus and Taurus is also ruled by Venus. And so there's only two planets under the traditional system that rule two signs. Mercury rules Virgo and Virgo and Gemini. And then Venus rules Libra and Taurus. And in Libra, you have the ox yoke symbolism. And then in Taurus, you're dealing with the actual bull, which is, if it's castrated, it's actually an ox. And so to me, that's just kind of interesting that the two signs that Libra is associated with has ox or bull symbolism kind of baked right into it. So just thought I would throw that out there as well. But absolutely, the guardian thing of the gateway makes so much sense to me on so many different levels, in part because, like I said, she's the guardian of her own gateway that can bring forth life, and everything else. Also, I will say that there's this really interesting esoteric thread that I'm following relating the primordial goddess, this dark mother, this queen of heaven presence or energy. And she's very much related to, there's several myths related to her being split in two, or that she is halved in some sort of way. Tiamat, there's a storyline with Tiamat that we live within her, basically, essentially, that the cosmos is feminine and that she was split in two and that we live within her. There's also symbolism relating the mother scorpion being split in two, so her children can be born, that her children actually open her up from the inside. And so there's symbolism related to the blade and this primordial goddess who is very much associated with the North as well, I'm coming to find out, but her having been split into two different parts, which I think is really interesting as it relates to this card. And then I don't think we're going to get around to it today, but the art card very much relates to this as well, because you see a woman and she's split in half, so the idea of woman being split is very much sort of in play here as well. And then I also it kind of reminds me of sexual symbolism, to be honest.
I'm laughing because, I mean, with the site I'm looking at right now, it does also consider the symbolic meaning for this card, prod or tongue. So I'm like kind of, talking about splitting them in half and you got the tongue going. Yeah. I mean, that makes me think of the Gnostic Mass, honestly.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. So there's two aspects to her. There's a light aspect and there's a dark aspect. And if you're going to have a judge, you would want them to understand both sides. You would want them to be able to see the spectrum of things versus just being only on one side or the other. And so there's very much a light and dark sort of component going on here.
Something I did notice, and this only, again, it could be coincidental. I'm not counting those two spheres in the middle with the chains because then, to me, they're half a sphere because they're kind of open, whatever. If you count all of the ones that are closed, I'm getting 17. Now, this card, again, like I said, is associated with prod or tongue. Now, the Hanged Man, I'm just going to use this as an example. The letter Mem, meaning water, overpower, reversal. The next card, death, none, fruit, fish. But now if you go all the way down to the 17th card, which will be the Tower, even though it's 16, it's the 17th actual card. That is the throat, the mouth, speak, and word. That's really interesting. If I'm correct on this, it's relating back to the tongue and mouth again and something.
Your tongue is known as a rudder. It kind of gets you through things. So they talk about that a lot in the Bible. Your tongue is a rudder. So when you speak forth things, you're traveling through, and you use your tongue as a means of, how do I want to put this? It's like a form of transcendence, using your tongue as a rudder to kind of get through what you need to get through to get to where you need to go. Think of it as like a boat. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You totally got it.
Another interesting thing I just remembered, because I have covered I covered Nightmare on Elm Street and Michael Myers as being like kind of like beast symbolism. And there was things that referred to like the number 17, and I was going into Crowley 777, and even the symbol, some of the symbols that fall under 17 is like a straight line or is like a sword or a knife.
Mm.
Okay.
Right. You're seeing that again
right.
here with what she's holding in her hand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, exactly.
So
exactly.
I mean, maybe I'm actually onto something with the referring to 17 as well. That's weird.
So the other thing I'll say, and it'll be more obvious, although there's definitely shades of it here. It'll be more obvious in the Rider-Waite version, but it's not uncommon for Lady Justice to be sitting between pillars or sets of pillars, right? This reminds me very much of the fact that the High Priestess also, that's the tradition as well, is that she's sitting between two pillars like we've covered. So this gets back into the symbolism that this figure here is the middle way. It's the middle path. It's the gateway through. It's the unison of opposites. It's operating on the spectrum. It's not just on the black or the white or the positive or the negative. That there is this impartial sort of thing going on, or this third way, right? And woman being associated with this third way is very, very common with this middle way. And so that's why she appears on the High Priestess card. That's why, as we'll see in the next card here, she's right in between those two pillars. And so there's a complete sort of thing going on here, this unison of opposites, this unifying sort of aspect, I guess, that she is embodying here, which is why she's in perfect balance, right?
I do want to just mention this right here. This kind of looks like the Fleur de Lis to me.
Yeah.
You will get that look if you go to the equator and was to tape the skies, because of what you were saying before. You will actually get that look. And when your lens in your eye shifts, it spurts water that way as well.
Two quick things. Yes, I agree with you. It does look like the Fleur de Lis. I'm actually working on a Fleur de Lis presentation right now that I'm going to be giving next week on another show. And just very, very quickly, the Fleur de Lis, in my opinion, what it really breaks down to is there's a line of mythology where women are given a flower, and this flower was the catalyst or impetus for them to have a virgin birth. And so there's a relationship with fertility and virgin birth symbolism with the Fleur de Lis. And so just thought I would throw that out there, meaning that this goes back to the idea that there was a primordial goddess who did not have a partner, because no such partner even existed yet she was able to procreate. She was able to give birth, to the first masculine energy. Very similar to Virgin Mary Christ, very similar to Sophia and the Demiurge and things like that. So throwing that out there. But then also, too, those are the feathers of Maat on top of her head as well. So it's the plumes of Maat, which Maat is very much related to this card in so many different ways. She's related to justice and the truth and, things like that. And under the Egyptian weighing of the souls ritual, you would weigh the heart of a man against the feather of Maat, which is the feather of truth. And this was going to decide his fate. And so I believe the whole ritual, it's called psychostasis. But the weighing of the souls ritual is very much in line with this card here, in so many different ways. So if you lived a heavy life, you did not live lightly, you weren't living righteously, you were burdened by this experience because probably you had a hard time letting go. That's what sword symbolism is really good for. Letting go, cutting cords, things like that. If you were weighed down here, that doesn't, that's not in line with the favorable afterlife transition, essentially. If you were living lighter, if you had more of a lightness to you and you weren't, burdened by, you know, the things here. You're able to transmute those energies and things like that. If you weren't necessarily corded here, I think that's one of the things is like, if you're super corded here, I don't think that's a good thing personally, you know. So I've always heard all of the ghost stories and stuff. It's always somebody who they have unfinished business here. You know, there's something that happened in their life where they feel like there's something unresolved, essentially. You know, by the time you know, hopefully by the time you cease to be here, you know, you will have let go of some of these burdens and struggles and stresses and things like that. I think that's partly what life is about, is just kind of learning how to live lightly in such a heavy place.
For sure.
Easier said than done, though, right?
Yes.
Nice. All right. I'm going to move on to the next one. There we go. That is the Justice card in the Rider-Waite.
Okay. So, again, like Mario said, we have some pillar symbolism here. So, basically, her secret name is the Daughter of the Lords of Truth and the Ruler of Balance. So, she's the mediator, equilibrium on the ascent, seeking to understand the universal laws. This kind of reminds me of Mark Passio's. He did a whole series on just this card alone. And it was basically like understanding universal laws and putting them into action. This card is actually the central position in the major arcana. It's a pivot for all the other keys going up. So you have the 231 gates, you have the wheel there, swings around. This one is the midpoint before you start ascending upward, you know, to get to the top. She's known as the guardian of the gate of ascension. She's all about discernment and actions, thoughts, and words, and fairness, of course. I'll talk a little bit about 11. So the number 11, this is the 11th card, is the first master number. It's very mystical in nature. 1 and 1 makes 2, so it's like a duality, a mirror of individual self-consciousness. It sees itself as a mirror. So this card is about like looking at oneself and, you know, seeing your dual nature. The scales represent balance, of course. It's an outcome of our intentions. We compensate and adjust. So that's where I see the adjustment in the Thoth deck, it being called adjustment, because adjustment is needed. Once you figure out the universal laws, you're going to have to adjust what you're doing, or even adjust your magical practice at some time when you get to that point where things are need to be done in different ways to achieve the result that you want, right? So the sword represents discernment, and none can escape justice. It is the law. And swords can be used to cut, or they can actually be used to consecrate things. Especially back in the Renaissance era, they were used to consecrate. When somebody got knighted, they used a sword on each shoulder because they were supposed to be fair and just in the rule and carry out the will of the king or God, because kings back then were seen, you know, as a direct line to God, to divinity. So the crown that she's wearing represents Kether on the Tree of Life. It represents a perfect state of being. So the robes, you have red robes, and then you have a green cape or sash coming down. So the red represents Mars. It represents action, masculine energy. And the green represents Venus, which is working together. It's all about nature, love, and beauty. And the funny thing is, if you mix red and green together, then you get the color gray. So gray represents wisdom in the occult because it's, you know, black and white duality coming together, and it represents wisdom. This card is a card of air, which represents intellect. She's got 1 foot sticking out underneath her robe there, and this represents that she's ready to act, and that she has poise and self-direction, that she's ready to go in the direction that she needs to go and make adjustments to where she's going, depending on what she needs. So the purple curtain behind her, it's purple in the universal deck. Here it's red in the Rider-Waite. The universal Rider-Waite, those have way different colors in them. They're a little bit more vibrant, but any way you look, it's a curtain behind her, so it's hiding something. She's like the gatekeeper. And then Mario brought up her being related to Maat, the goddess of truth and order. The white feather represented righteousness and purity in the halls of justice. So he explained that whole process, of the Egyptian process of Maat, weighing out the feather. It represents integrity, conscious, inner voice, balance, clearing karma, knowing your purpose in life. And it's also a reminder to blend the spiritual and physical aspects of your ascension process. You've got to have both. You can't have too much of one or the other. And it's about having one foot here on earth and one foot in heaven. So you kind of have to bring this down with, universal law will bring this down and unify these two things for discernment on where to go next. So this is a card of action. To me, I know she's female on there, but there you see both of these themes in the card. You see a feminine aspect, and then you see a masculine aspect. So those things being brought together, that's the universal law in itself. If you look at the 7 Hermetic principles as well, you have to have all those things kind of together to make it come like full circle. And then I also wrote down Thoth. For measure and balances, I think my notes there, I was trying to get with, Maat and Thoth and that whole Egyptian thing that Mario talked about. So I'm not going to drain that because, he talked about that. This card also represents the 7th house in the Zodiac. And that's pretty much all I get from that one is, universal laws, righteousness, justice, fairness, balance. We all need this in our life. When things kind of get off track, that's when things start getting screwed up. So I think this is a very important pivotal card in the Rider-Waite, and I love that it is the pivot point from, it's right smack in the middle, and it goes up on the ascension towards the spiritual aspect, because every card before this one was more physical, dealing with physical aspects, and then you hit this one, and then now you're going to the spiritual aspect. So I think this card is perfect for in between, because you got physical on one end, spiritual on the other, and you've got to combine these. And this is the first card that kind of kicks you off in that direction of action towards spirit.
Wow. Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Love it.
I was even gonna say, like, on the just like really the most like just even a basic example. Pretty much what you both had said. Even if you look at this, in my opinion, as like just shadow work. If you take an honest look at yourself and look at like judge yourself, not letting somebody else actually judge you, be the judge of yourself, and then remove what is not needed and is fucking your life up.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure just that,
there you go.
Just that in itself, you'll have spiritual advancement and be a happier person.
Yes. For
yeah,
sure.
no, man, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
definitely.
I think that was great that he said that.
So the this idea of balance, right? I like this just line of thinking, right? Balance within self. Your physical self, your visible self, your spiritual self, your whatever. And Libra is in so many different amazing, incredible, synchronistic sort of ways relates to balance as well with where it's at in the year. And so, as an example, Libra is at the beginning of the fall equinox. And so we have equal parts day and night, right? And so Aries is the beginning of the spring equinox, another situation where we have equal parts day and night. So we're actually going into the fall with Libra, right? And then also where Libra is at, it's right in between Virgo and Scorpio. Virgo has a glyph that looks like an M. It's like an M with a little fish embedded into it. Scorpio has a glyph where it's an M. It's an M, and then it has this little hook tail sort of thing. And so it looks like the stinger, symbolically, like the stinger of the scorpion, right? And so what are the odds that Virgo is an M glyph, and that obviously it relates to virginity and things like that. And virginity back in the day doesn't mean what it means now. It meant more so unwed, basically. Yes. But it does have all of this symbolism related to purity and things like that. Hence virgin birth symbolism and what have you. And so Virgo is considered to be in the day side of the zodiac. And then once we hit fall, we're now in the night side of the zodiac until we get back to spring. So the night side of the zodiac are all the fall signs and the winter signs, and then the spring and the summer signs are the day side aspect of the zodiac. And so Virgo is the day side, then you have Libra, and then you have Scorpio, which is in the night side. And arguably, there's stuff related to Scorpio that relates to whore symbolism, I guess, if you want to put it that way. So it's this balance between virgin and whore, in my opinion. When I look at Virgo and I look at Scorpio, that's very much in play, in so many different ways. And so there's that natural balance between these two signs on opposite ends of Libra, which is the scales, which represents this balance, right? And so to me, that is not kind of a coincidence. It's also been said too, very much related to this, is that Virgo, Libra, and Scorpio, depending on who you ask, it was once believed by certain people that this was actually one big sign. And then Libra was introduced, and it split these signs up into three different separate signs: Virgo, Libra, Scorpio. And so Libra may have been introduced into this huge, gigantic sign and is kind of the middle point between the two ends of the sign, Virgo and Scorpio. And so this is why, too, the pans of Libra are sometimes referred to as the claws, the northern claw and the southern claw. And there's some sky maps where you actually see the claws of Scorpio in the pans of Libra, and so there's a relationship between the claws of Scorpio and the pans of Libra. And there's that possibility that all of these signs, these three signs, was actually just one gigantic, massive sign back in the day. So just thought I would throw that out there as well.
Wasn't there originally like 13 in different types of astrology? Didn't
sure,
they
yeah, there's
like one. I need to learn more about that, but I think there's a correlation there, if memory serves.
The 13th sign would be probably what you're thinking of is a Fucus, which is like the serpent handler or the serpent bearer. Mm-hmm. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe he's positioned in between Scorpio and Sagittarius. But he's a little more inward. He's actually a little more northern than the ecliptic, the path of the sun. Gotcha. But yeah, no, there's multiple variations of how many signs there were at one point and things like that. So I've heard many different takes over the years. But that one has always stuck with me. This idea that we're potentially dealing with, and they're all very feminine, and so that's the other thing too. Again, Lady Justice and then Virgo and Scorpio. And so there's this sort of idea that they were all just one gigantic, huge sign in the sky. So I obviously, I can't say concretely or anything like that, but I've heard things like that over the years. So
okay,
food for thought more than anything else.
Yes, for sure.
Mario, you were going back to Virgo and Scorpio a lot, and it brought me back to my days of the lesser banishing ritual of the hexagram. And in that, you do go, you start off, you go INRI, and then you go Yod, Nun, Resh, Yod, which is kind of like, in my opinion, just another Yod-Hey, Vod-Hey, pretty much. You do go Virgo, Isis, Mighty Mother, and then right after that you say Scorpio, Apophis, and Destroyer. I just find it interesting how you even we're putting them together, and they actually go one after the other in that ritual.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Even for this is totally off topic, but in that ritual, you do at one point you extend your arms and you go the sign of Osiris slain, and
Osiris,
then
Apophis,
and then you make a swastika with your arms, and you look your head down and you say the sign of mourning of Isis. Then right after that, go like this and say the sign of Apophis and Typhon. Is that why Crowley gave Churchill this symbol to defeat the Nazis?
So are you saying this is a Typhonian symbol?
You know what? I'm looking at something. Let me get back to the screen. I wasn't looking at you guys.
Is the peace sign a Typhonian symbol?
I take it that way.
Interesting.
Yeah. It can be used that way, I think.
Right. Well, it actually makes sense on a lot of levels, because just to go on a quick tangent or whatever, this is one of my big rabbit holes right now is Typhon and Typhonian symbolism. And so there's the Greek Typhon, but now in today's world, Typhon is used as a substitute name for this primordial mother that I've been talking about, this Queen of Heaven. And so when you're doing this, there's a splitting sort of component, right? And what was I talking about earlier with the sword and justice and everything else, and this idea that this great old mother is split in two, essentially. So it kind of relates to that, but then it also reminds me of the serpent tongue, right? The forked tongue. And so she's very much connected to the serpent as well, in so many different ways.
And then you go back to that high-pitched hitch with that serpent tongue again.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So anyways, I'm going to have to look into that one, but that's very interesting.
And then I'm gonna real quick, I'm just going to jump on to, and then we'll get back to your cards. I just did want to show, this is what I was getting at with my card, where I was saying it, looks a little bit different and has these, kind of angles here. And again, you even kind of have the snake in there, and I'm wondering, does that have to do with different vibrational rates, but whatever. You have this,
absolutely.
And then this is how the lights reflect on your lens.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then
I see that there.
And then look at 20th Century Fox.
That's huge, man. That's huge.
Same fucking thing. One closed, one open.
Mm.
And go back to the card real quick.
And I do think that card might be showing that.
Dude, come on. And then you got the symbolism of the light and the dark, death, and then rebirth through the light. And then you have the black and white symbolism, and she's got the feather. And look, her toes are pointed once more.
I don't want to keep going, focusing on it so much, but I really do think that Zaniel's Azin shit is huge in this tower, at least. Again, when you were mentioning something before, I think with your Hermit card, you talked about how it looked like hair or a bush or this and that. I wondered if the feather is still showing you the same thing.
Right.
And then that would still be going to, again, even how, sometimes the feather, in Led Zeppelin, when they showed the feather, it's almost like a hook. It's like an upside-down J, again, with Jupiter and abundance and Chesed. To me, it's just, you're getting into the part where I was even saying that maybe that's when you start raising them, like I was saying before. It just seems way too coincidental for me.
I want this.
Yeah, I do think this deck specifically, the Magical Golden Dawn, I do think, in my opinion, it is actually heavily eye-detailed, actually, this deck specifically.
Yeah, no, I agree. Symbolically, for
sure.
Yes,
that's what I think. And then, I guess, this is the next one that we're going on to, the Hanged Man, correct? Yes.
Yeah. So, the Hangman, number 12, right? The first thing I think of whenever this card comes up in readings, is just this idea of seeing things in a new way, in a new light, breaking old patterns. And certainly being upside down is going to give you a new perspective on things. And so even you have those blocks behind them, that grid, it's almost like it's implying a pattern, right? And so it's implying an orderly set of lines that give you this pattern that this figure is now completely kind of submerged in or immersed in, but he's upside down. And so what's this upside down business? What's going on? It reminds me very much, obviously, of Odin hanging from the World Tree, Yggdrasil. That's where he received the runes. There's this idea of a dying god, and gods. I think of Christ being crucified. This reminds me of that, obviously, in a few different ways. You could see the nails in his hands and his feet right there. But there's a line of mythology that relates to this idea of a dying god, and that this death is kind of the impetus for the final sort of enlightenment phase of their life, essentially. And so that's why when we go to the Rider-Waite version of this card, you will see that the Hanged Man, he actually has a halo right behind his head. So there's always this enlightenment sort of implication that's going on. And this, to me, it almost feels counterintuitive or something like that, where it's just like, wait a second, he's hanged. He looks like he can't get out of that position, yet he's enlightened, yet he's actually being he's transitioning to this new phase. He's ascending essentially.
He's getting his adjustment right there.
What was that?
He went to the chiropractor and he's getting his adjustment.
Right. Yeah, totally. So to me, that's very interesting, this dying god sort of aspect, and that they don't actually die, they transmute, they transform. And so in a reading when this comes up, one of the things I like to say is that this figure put himself there. No one else put this person there. And that's how I look at the tarot in general anyway. Whenever there's a conflict or whatever, it's like it's you versus yourself. You know what I mean? So it's you versus your habits. It's you versus your patterns or whatever. And so this is how you break out of that mold. It's kind of showing you this upside down sort of reality, right? And that's kind of one of the things that I find really fascinating about this card as well, is that there are several occultists. The one I'm thinking of in particular is John Dee, who was the Royal Court Astrologer, 007, the original 007, all that stuff. But in one of the books I read about John Dee, it was called John Dee and the Empire of Angels. I want to read that. I recently watched this big documentary about John Dee, and I'm like so fast. Sorry to interrupt you. No, you're good.
I've got that in my list to buy, and I'm so excited to read that. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I just dove into the whole John Dee thing. So when you said that, I was smiling, because that's something that I'm super focused on right now.
It's a juicy rabbit hole,
yeah.
to say the least.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of material if you want to get into it. That's really, to be honest, that's like one of my main exposures to John Dee. Because I heard an interview with the author, Jason Louv, and he's an interesting guy for a few different reasons. But in the book, and hopefully I'm not spoiling anything for you.
No, please, go ahead.
A couple of the big revelations that John Dee supposedly said, according to the research of Jason Louv, is that any occultist that has really done their homework will realize that we actually live in an inverted world, and that time is actually going backwards and things are actually upside down here. And so it's a very interesting revelation. And to me, I'm like, oh, I can kind of see that on a few different levels. Kind of reminds me of some of your eye research, about how things, just in our own system too, right? Like kind of get flipped and switched, once we perceive the whatever we're sensing or whatever. And so anyway, so there's multiple ways of thinking about things being inverted here, that we live in an upside down reality. Things are completely distorted and flipped inside out. We're moving backwards. Maybe we're upside down, and even just symbolically looking at society, it does kind of feel that way. It feels like a lot of things are completely flipped around and, are upside down. And so we live in clown world that sort of way. And so I think there's a lot of ways of kind of interpreting this card too that actually speaks to a closer aspect to reality, and that's kind of what, when you get into the mysteries and you get into magic and you get into occultism and stuff like that, you will find that things aren't necessarily what they appear to be. That a lot of things are very illusory here, and things that you thought were like concrete or whatever, you're just going to have your programming sort of triggered, and you're going to be, you're going to have your threshold pushed in so many different ways. And so, but I think that is kind of the magical path or the spiritual path or whatever you want to say, is that, a lot of what you maybe consider to be like a sacred cow is going to, they're going to be slaughtered. A lot of the things that you thought you took for granted or whatever, they're going to be challenged. And so this card represents that kind of breaking out of those patterns, breaking those things that maybe are challenging to you, breaking the norm, stuff like that. And so the esoteric name for this card is Spirit of the Mighty Waters. And actually the Hebrew letter, I believe, is Nun or Nun, right? N-U-N, which means, it doesn't mean fish or water. I always get it confused.
Water. Mem,
yeah.
Water, overpower, reversal.
So that makes perfect sense. So Spirit of the Mighty Waters, so it very much relates to water. This reminds me of a rebirth, if you will. It reminds me of a cleansing, right? Or even of a baptismal sort of thing.
Baptism, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think all of those things are absolutely in play.
Don't you hold the baby from one leg too?
I don't know. Is that supposed to be the thing? Maybe.
I think
perhaps,
you hold the baby from like 1 foot. Actually, I could be wrong. And you
right.
I think they do in some.
Yeah.
And so here, speaking of the 1 foot thing, everything's flipped upside down. So it's like what you put on the top of the canvas for a tarot card is very important, you know. And then people read, obviously here in the West, upper left to lower right. And so the foot is in the most prominent position. I've seen the case that people have actually corresponded this card with Pisces, which relates to the feet, right? And so even here, it doesn't have a sign that it's associated with. It just has the glyph for water, which I think is interesting. So to me, there is kind of a Piscean sort of quality with this. And so for the feet to be in the most prominent position, to me says a lot, very much relates to Pisces, in my opinion. But what I was going to say is that he's hanging from the Ankh, right? And the Ankh is very much a symbol related to the cross. But the cross and the Ankh, they both relate, in my opinion, to the world tree. It relates to the world axis. And so when Odin is hanging from the world tree, that's what he's hanging from the world axis, essentially. And so this figure here is also hanging from this world axis, or from symbolically the world tree, I would say. And so those are a few of the things off the top of my head that come to mind. There's other things, but I want to hear your guys' take.
Real quick, I'm just going to let you can go after me, Megan. I'm just going to repeat a few things that were said in the chat that I think is actually very interesting. The branch said Achilles' heel story, he is held by a single foot too. And somebody was making a reference before. I think maybe you might have even said it yourself before. Ankle, you know, it just seems like very weird. And then you have Achilles' heel. You know, it's just very interesting, and wanted to mention that. You can
nice. Yeah, that's very fascinating.
You can go, Megan.
Is that a snake that's at the bottom there?
Yes, and I believe there's another one around his foot. Okay.
So that in itself, you know, represents awakening, like, you know, a Kundalini awakening. But what's cool is that it's at his head instead of his feet, but he does have one at his foot as well.
Right.
Is that missing a head?
Inversion. Yeah. Yeah, that one's a little harder. At first, like, if you pull it back, it looks like a rope. But yeah, that's cool that he's hanging upside down and that the snake is there and then the snake is all on top. So if you were to flip that card around, you see awakening in either or, right? So it's like a joining of as above, so below.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do like the grid pattern there in the back, and then the sun symbol. See, what's cool about this card is whatever way you turn it, it means the same thing. That's what's cool to me about this card. And then, of course, this card, this card is associated with sacrifice. Okay, so you have, in the Rider Waite, you don't have any nails or anything. The stigmata that he's got in And I find it also interesting the shape of his face or his head there. It's like there's no facial features, it's geometric shapes. I find that really interesting as well. So yeah, that's the thing that sticks out to me is like either way you turn this card, you're going to get the same thing. That's pretty much all I've got to say about that.
All right. Go on to the next one. See, like this one real quick, I just think is interesting because like, again, like we're going back to what we showed on the feet. You still have it pointing on this one. The other one you didn't. But again, this one is like kind of, it's almost like basically what we looked at the last card. You just moved that one leg and brought it down now. You know how like on the last ones we were even pointing at and emphasizing how those legs got their feet sticking out. In this card, you just bent one down. Was that the adjustment that had to be made to the last card?
Perfect. Yes. Yes, this is the adjustment that was needed to go down that path that you needed to go down, or go up the path that you needed to go up to transcend on that, you know, on your path upwards towards enlightenment. So on this one, Mario already said the secret name is the Spirit of the Mighty Waters. It's card number 12, so there's some 12 symbolism I'll talk about here in just a second. This card is also associated with Neptune, and Neptune is associated with water. So I'm not surprised about, the spirit of the mighty waters. And water represents emotion. And we have to deal with our emotions to become enlightened to a certain point. We need to learn how to react to things. If you act shitty, when things happen, your life's going to be a shitstorm, right? So him hanging here, thinking about everything kind of is getting him to the point where he needs to become enlightened. So this is actually the first card on the ascension process after the justice card. He's in suspended animation or like on a vision quest, if you will. So this represents the principles of surrender and new perspectives. And so 12 is a complete cycle of manifestation. There's 12 months in a year, 12 signs of the Zodiac, 12 apostles, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 dimensions on earth. So this just that stuff alone represents earth and heaven coming together, right? So in all the previous keys, the Arcana that represent the physical, this one is the one where, you have that justice card, which is a middle point where they're bringing, all the physical and then the spiritual. Well, this one is like that first rung up for spiritual. And then you have 1 + 2 = 3. So 3 is creativity. So his eyes are opened here. So that was something that stood out to me. So it's seeing the world through his path of illumination. His eyes aren't closed. He doesn't have this certain look on his face. He's just kind of stoic, right? And since his eyes are open, that's kind of a symbol for, now he's seeing things in the way that he needs to see them. He's cut everything out of his life that no longer serves him anymore. And he's at the point where, okay, I see this now. I see the path ahead. And he's in suspension between heaven and earth. You can look at it like that too. I mean, you have the wood there and you have more pillar symbolism. But the thing about the pillar symbolism in this card is it's shorter. It's not a full pillar. So it's not a full-on gateway that he's got to go through. It's a shorter one because now he's seeing things from a different perspective. So that path that, the pillars that he has to go through aren't as hard, if you will, to get through because we got shorter ones. So this card represents the rite of initiation. So when you get to that point when you're being initiated, this is like the actual rite of the initiation process, him suspended there. And this also reminded me of a Carl Jung quote. It is as if the consciousness mind volunteers to die in order to bear a new fruitful life in the unconscious. So that quote really reminded me of what embodies this card. It's a reversal of thoughts and concepts. It's the aha card or that sudden illumination card when you've been contemplating and meditating for a while and then you have that aha moment all of a sudden. So this is the epitome. Yes, this is like the epitome of that card. It's about meditation, being calm, inner quiet, stillness. It's a card of complete receptivity. Okay, as opposed to, the justice card. Well, you move into this one. And this one's more of like a feminine, receptive type card. It's voluntary surrender of the ego, and it's grasp upon our will and our mind. This card is all about gaining wisdom through suffering and sacrifice to get to the fruits of your hardship. And that's why he's like in this painful position with his hands behind him and 1 foot down. That's obviously a painful position to be in, especially if you're hanging upside down. So it's a card of like true sacrifice. And then the other notes that I wrote down was Odin and the Tree of Life. But Mario already went over that, so I'm going to skip that. So his red leggings, they represent fire and action. Okay, and then the blue tunic represents receptivity, like water. So we were talking about that receptive type. And so it's seeing things from the perception in another way. Let me see. I can't even read my own writing here. So, okay, it gives you the right moment that you need to receive the right knowledge or initiate yourself into action. So it like represents that moment, that perfect moment in time where you receive the information that you need just in time to be able to go on to react and do what you need to do to move on. So this card is all about learning to react to life the correct way, as opposed to, you know, we talked about this a little bit earlier, just, you know, if freaking out over certain things that happen, you are the only person that can control how you react. Nothing that happens to you is anybody else's fault but your own. So this is like a card of self-sacrifice, figuring that out, that everything is within, nothing is without. There's no one around you that can cause anything. It's all within, but you have to control the way that you react to certain situations, and becoming enlightened helps you do this. And I think this is the epitome of this card.
Nice. Yeah, hence the receptivity that you were talking about as well.
Yeah.
The inner nature. Yeah, well put. A couple things I wanted to point out. So notice that it's really interesting that this is supposed to be like a tree, but you know, we don't see trees that just grow upward and then just have this crossbar coming out of it like that, right? And so to me, this is alluding to the cross, essentially, right? The same sort of mythology, the sacrificial sort of thing. And Christ is heavily connected to sacrifice, especially with his relationship through Aries. And so there's a lot of Aries symbolism related to the sacrifice or the crucifixion. And so that's the time of year it takes place in as well, right? Aries season.
Yes.
But this tree, what we're seeing here, this trunk and that crossbar, it very much relates to the crucifix. It relates to this idea of a Tau cross, which I'm starting to see that all crosses are Tau crosses, and that the Ankh is also a Tau cross. And so Tau very much relates to Taurus, right? T-A-U. And Tau is also it's a Greek letter. There's a Hebrew correspondence with Tau and everything else. But it's mirrored, this idea of a cross, or the Tau cross, is also mirrored with his legs as well, right? So his legs are crossed as well. And so the one-legged symbolism that we were talking about in the Justice card is also present here, except it's completely flipped upside down. And as I was saying, with the one-legged or the tapering of legs to that fine point, it relates to the world axis. And so one of the constellations that's close to Polaris is Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. They revolve closely around the North Star. Ursa Major used to be referred to as the thigh of the bull, or the thigh of Set. And so just imagine if you're on one leg, you know, you're kind of like an axle, essentially. You know, that's how you're going to spin around real quick, as if you're going to be on one leg, sort of thing. So it relates to that point of pivot. And so this is polar symbolism stuff, essentially. And so I think that one leg relates back to the pole, the world axis, the axis mundi, which is the cosmic axis, essentially. And then also people have pointed out, too, that his legs do look like the number 4. It looks like the Jupiter glyph. Or the Jupiter glyph, rather, is also number 4. And Pisces, which this card has been related to, the traditional planetary correspondence using the 7 traditional planets, the correspondence with Pisces was Jupiter as well. And so I think it's kind of interesting that his legs are red, and Jupiter is a very fiery sort of planet as well. So that's going on. And then also just wanted to say, too, that along my sort of symbolic travels, I've learned that 12 is a heavily solar number. So it's very much related to solar symbolism, which is why we do have 12 traditional signs around the ecliptic, which is the path of the sun. It's why we have a 24-hour day. And so many things break down to 12 here. The clock, right, has, 12 numbers and everything else. And so, but the number 12 is very, very much tied to the sun. And so there's even old myths about the world tree having fewer branches and being related to different traditions. So there are myths where the world tree has 7 branches and was actually more of a polar symbol, as in it relates to more so to the pole star and it relates to Ursa Major. And then at some point, this world tree grew to have 12 branches, which is why we live in a solar sort of paradigm now. You know, we're taught about a solar system and all of these solar ways of looking at everything, solar symbolism and stuff. So just wanted to throw that out there as well, that the number 12 absolutely 100%, according to my research, is related to the sun in so many different ways. Hence that little halo, you know, sunburst behind his head sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even with like the number 3 in itself, you want to look at 12 and then 1, 2, and then 3. 3 times 2 is 6. Like it's a multiple 6. You know, that would go into the sun anyway. I see how like you could relate with numbers and shit like that.
Right. Totally.
Was there anything else you guys wanted to cover on this card? I think we'll just wrap it up here. I did want to get into death, but we're already an hour and 38 minutes in. I think that's good enough for us. So.
Totally. Honestly, I think I'm pretty good. Got most everything off my chest that I wanted to. But yeah, this was a good time, as always.
Hell yeah. Yeah, no, I really, I think they're getting better as we go on. So I'm truly enjoying this. Thank you both very much for that. And thank you, everybody in the chat. Huge. At one point, we were at 33 people. Maybe we went higher, but that's the highest I've noticed so far. So, yeah, that's pretty cool and interesting. And thank you all from the people from Mario's channel, which there is a lot of you. And Slick Dissident, what the hell is up, man? I haven't seen you in a while. Good stuff seeing you around, man. I see all of you like jumped in the chat and dropped tons and tons and tons and tons of stuff. So that is what's up. That's why I love when people come in and join the chat. Even if I couldn't get into and cover everything in the chat, I'm hoping the people watching are looking at some of the stuff in there. Some really good, solid stuff from the listeners. That is what's up, and thank you. I really couldn't appreciate it anymore. Mario, let everybody know about your stuff again real quick before we end it.
Yeah, absolutely. So once again, symbolicstudies.com is where you can find me. Open for tarot readings, study sessions, things like that, but you can find all my info there.
Awesome. Yes, and the links for you is in the bottom, your stuff. And Megan, thank you again for jumping on with us and let everybody know about your stuff. And remind people, just in case somebody's listening from the area, where you do your stuff at.
Yeah, so you guys can find me on Instagram. That's my main. 7 Degrees of Wisdom, no numbers on the end, no underscores, no dashes. And then you can find me on Facebook. Nick will have the links below in the video. If you guys want to book any services with me, I do spiritual consultations, manifesting consultations, paranormal consultations. I also do tarot readings, and I teach a plethora of classes that I can do in person and online. And if anybody local is watching, I work at 2 shops in Fort Smith, Arkansas. If you want to do in-person classes or reading, I have 2 classes coming up, actually. I'm going to do Intro to Astrology again, and then I'm going to do another one on High Magic. That one's coming up on the 25th and the 26th. If you guys want to get a hold of me for anything, just direct message me on any one of those platforms.
Awesome. And as a reminder, I just want to let everybody know, if you do want to contact them, and you do contact them, just make sure it's the same account you hit up, because these two do such, great work on Instagram. There are scam artists out there trying to impersonate them. Yep. So make sure that, you're talking to the right person, and
good call.
Honestly, again, I'm not trying to guess both your heads, but if you have people faking your accounts, you must be doing something right. Trying to pull, thank you both very much for, part 4 of what's probably going to be in like a 7 or 8 part series. I thank you very much for spending all the time that we have put into this. That's what's up, for real. I appreciate it. And thanks again for all the listeners. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.